Good morning. Welcome to day 16 in the art of allowing. And if you're just joining us in this challenge, we've crossed our halfway mark. And this challenge is all about submission, surrender, allowing. You can use whatever terminology you feel comfortable with, but it comes down to allowing God to essentially unfold God's reality the way that it needs to be unfolded. What does that mean, you say? It means not trying to control, not trying to change or force outcomes to line up with your expectations. It means when life is handed to you, when life is delivered to you, you take it for what it is, we give thanks, and we move on. It means monitoring that chatter, that voice that is constantly chirping. And so today, what I want to talk about is the memory, or better yet, remembering. And I think on day 16, I'd like us to allow the memories to come back. And not from a nostalgic standpoint, but more so to defend those voices. And one of the greatest things, greatest mysteries maybe, of our human nature is that we forget. And I wonder, why do we forget? Why does a child forget? As a child, they had to tell you something, most children at least. You got to tell them something so many times. And even when you tell them, you got to remind them that you just told them. And that's why people who have, quote unquote, great memories are, they're sought after and they're looked at as extraordinary. But I think God made us this way because that's just a human functionality. We're not, inferior or dumb or less capable. We just don't have a great memory. And think about it. When we look at Scripture, according to the stories that we read there, God parts the Red Sea. And a few days later, these people are worried about water. Then they get manna from heaven. And then they're worried about food. Then they get, and this is not in order, but they get delivered from the Egyptians. And then they want to go back to the same people that held them as slaves. And the problem wasn't about God doing what God was supposed to do. The problem was their memory. They forgot. And this is why in this challenge, we are focusing on repetition, because the brain builds through patterns and repetition. And this is even scientific. I know we've all heard neurons that fire together, wire together, or something like that. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Yes. And all that means is whatever you repeat becomes familiar. You brush your teeth every morning, it becomes familiar. When you were a child, that wasn't familiar. And this is why you see a lot of ads repeating the same message, because they're programming you. You look at when it's time for elections, the same messages. Look at social media. And if you look at your own media inside your head, that voice is saying the same thing. You can't do it. You won't win. You can't succeed. And the voice knows something that most people on the outside don't. The more it talks, the louder it gets, the more you're going to believe. So, in other words, repetition creates some sort of anchor or belief system. And the problem that we have is we repeat fearful thoughts more than the truth. How many times have you stopped and rehearsed the truth about your life? And that voice is beating you. It's beating us. And the voice doesn't usually just stop. It doesn't tell a lie once. It repeats it. You're not good enough. You're falling behind. The rent's due. You're not going to make it. You're running out of resources. Nobody cares. It tells you all this negative stuff. And guess what? After you keep hearing this, Imagine you hearing this every single day. You stop questioning it. You start believing it. You accept it. And not because it's true. It doesn't have to be true for you to accept it. You accept it because it's familiar. It's what you've heard either internally or externally for years. And if you look at scripture, repetition was also the solution. You constantly see, remember. The Passover was a reminder. The Sabbath was a reminder. The stones that were taken from the Jordan River were reminders. The feasts that they had. Communion. Jesus said, do this in memory of me. And it wasn't about ritual. We turned it into rituals. But it was about remembrance. Because the things that you don't remember, you're going to forget. And that sounds so simple, but it's profound. If you do not take time to remember it, you're going to forget. That's human nature. I was in an Uber ride a week or so ago with my wife, and we had a driver who was a Muslim, and he was sharing about his Muslim, his faith. And we started talking about drinking and, how he doesn't drink and how he doesn't do certain things. And he said one of the things that keeps him anchored is his prayer. Muslims have to pray 5 times a day. And so whether you agree with that or not, there's psychology, there's wisdom behind that. Because those prayers, they do 2 things. They interrupt your ordinary life and they remind you. So if you want to take a drink at 1 p.m., but you got prayer at 1 p.m., you can't do it. So either you have to take the drink after your prayer or before the prayer, but your prayer says you have to come with a certain type of mindset. And so automatically that drink is eliminated. If you want to go steal, you can't steal and go say your prayer before or after. And so it interrupts and it reminds you. And so for us, we need to use the same strategy so we can interrupt the worry, the distraction, the need to be right, and return our focus and our attention to God. 5 times a day. It's a reminder that, guess what? There's something more powerful than me that has my attention. There's something that has given me life that I'm submitting to right now. And the repetition is not for God. It's for us. God doesn't forget. You don't need to remind God that God is over your life. And so this is one of the reasons why we're doing 3-hour check-ins for the next 14 days. Not because of accountability. This is really about support and remembrance. We spend about 20 hours, 18 hours a day unconscious in our thoughts. And then spend 10 minutes in prayer, 5 minutes in prayer. But what if we interrupted that pattern? What if we, every 3 hours, we say, hey, what am I giving my attention to? What voice am I listening to? What is actually true right now? Where has God already been faithful? So these calls are not accountability calls. They're just calls to remember. And if you look at the Bible, look at the Older Testament, and you see areas where God continuously reminds us, remember. I love one of the quotes in Joshua. I think it's Joshua 21 at the end. It summarizes the chapter and said that God kept every promise that God made to Israel. Every single one of them. And this was just to remind them that, hey, I've done my part. And when you look at this, the author is not predicting the future. He's remembering the past. Because that remembrance, that memory creates confidence for the future. And sometimes faith is not even about experiencing something new. Sometimes it's about remembering what you already seen. And so today, we're going to be allowing the remembrance, the memory. Remember when God brought you through something. Remember when God delivered you. Remember when God saved you all those times. And in psychology, they refer to it as a negative recall bias, because what we typically remember are the negative things. Especially if you're going through a challenge in life, you tend to be a prisoner of that moment. You remember all the other failures. You remember the people who took losses before you, the embarrassments, the mistakes. And then we conveniently forget that we're sitting, standing, walking in an answered prayer. Right now, whatever you're doing, more than likely it was an answered prayer. The business that you can't make payroll for was a prayer that God answered. The husband that you're not talking to, the wife that you're not sleeping with, is a prayer that God at some point answered. The children that are irritating you or distracting you don't want to deal with them, they were prayers to God that were answered. The doors that were opened. The frustration you're dealing with in traffic, that was healing that allowed you to even get up. Victories that were won, breakthroughs that you experienced that you just forgot. And that voice in your head is constantly telling you, you can't do this, you're not worthy, this, blah, blah, blah. And you believe it. I think when people think about Satan, I think when Jesus was in the desert, I think it was the desert for 40 days, I don't think there was a physical Satan that he was referring to. I think it was in his mind. And I think he was showing us that the only way to defeat that character in your mind that's constantly chirping, nagging, is through words, through remembering. And he remembered scripture. He remembered his identity. Because that voice is going to become louder if your memory is selective. Our bodies, our minds, our brains, we remember threats more easily than victories. Because guess what? Threats were necessary for survival. And so if you leave it unattended, your mind is naturally going to remember when somebody criticized you versus when somebody gave you praise. It's going to remember when you failed versus when you succeeded. It's going to remember when you were rejected more than when you were accepted. And I think that's an incomplete picture. If you truly want the picture to be complete, you have to remember God's promises and when God has delivered you. As you look at it from a kingdom builder standpoint, think about Goliath. Goliath said that this was the God that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and the bear. This is before he fought Goliath. David before he fought Goliath. So his confidence was built from a past victory. He didn't build it from thinking I can do this. And David's memory defeated Goliath before his weapon did. So today, let's remember, and allowing is not necessarily pretending that everything is all right. Yeah, you've got some drama, you've got some things going on, but it's trusting that God has already carried you in the past, and the same God that did it back then is capable, is willing, if you allow, to do it again. The voice might say, well, what if this doesn't work this time? Well, guess what? What about the last 2 times, 3 times, 100 times that it worked? We're not going to make payroll. Well, how many times have we faced impossible situations and still found a way out? So today, I challenge you all to take this seriously and do this exercise. Write down 5 times, or just a few times, that you thought a situation, a person, something would break you. Write down a few prayers a year ago, 2 years ago, that were answered that you have evidence of. A few times that provision, that God showed up unexpectedly. And if you can't think about this, it might take you a little bit longer, but write down some victories that you've won. 5, just 5 victories that you don't even think about anymore. And then I want you to consider this. If that God that brought you through all of those things did it back then, what evidence do you have today to think that it won't happen again? And I think if you do this exercise, you take it seriously, you're going to notice that you actually have a record of God's faithfulness. It's just the memory of it that's not there. And so today, remember, and we're going to keep reminding ourselves